friends. My name is Bishop Holsonback. This is my Rumble platform. And I got Gary Wayne with us tonight, my friends. We're going to be talking about the legends of giant and the mighty ones. All right? You know, my friends, a lot of people do not know that there's other giants other than Goliath. And Gary's going to break this down and connect the dots for us tonight. My friends, if you do not have Gary Wayne's book yet, please go out and get it. I got a link below me. It's at Genesis6conspiracy at gmail.com. And then Gary will direct you as well to where to go get his book at. But my friends, it's a must-have. All right, Mr. Wayne, we got the legends of the giants. You know, everybody knows about David and Goliath. What about his brothers? Did he have brothers, I was told?
Well, yeah, we're told biblically that Goliath was the son of a giant, and that giant had 4 other sons, maybe 5 as they're listed biblically, depending on how you want to look at a couple of the different sort of versions of the 5 brothers. So what's interesting is Josephus named the father of Goliath as Araph, A-R-A-P-H. And that's very, very similar to the word Rapha, as you know, Goliath was considered a giant, as were his 4 brothers. They were the sons of the giant. That's the Hebrew word Rapha for Rephaim. So yes, you have 4 of those brothers, and who knows, maybe there was other ones that father had produced as well. But if you look at the idea that you have Goliath, who is from Gath, and 4 other brothers there, and there are, 5 cities in the Philistine Pentapolis, makes you wonder how many giants were actually there, as well as the hybrid giants. Things that I do cover off in book 2 for people who are interested. And I cover some of this off in book 1, but I do it differently in book 2, particularly with expanded information on the Philistines that Goliath was part of. So, and all of David's men slew these particular giants from Gath as part of the Philistine wars, where he brought finally the Philistine hybrid and reinforced with giant empire to heal. And so you have Lami, that's the brother of Goliath, is another one of those names. You have Ishi Benob, as I recall, and a couple other ones where the names just kind of elude me right now, but they're listed with that whole story of those giants. And what's also interesting is that the Philistines, when they expropriated Gaza in about 1550 BC, they pushed out, according to Deuteronomy 2, the Avim, but not all of the Avim. So you have Avim that are going to control one of the Philistine states. And so you could maybe look at Avim as being the giant tribe that Goliath might come from. But we also learn in the book of Joshua that 2 other cities, Gath and another city, are controlled by the Anakites or the Anakim. So he could be Anakim, he could be Rephaim, or he could be Avim by the understanding. And because the Philistines came from Gath, he could have been Cherithim or Pelathim or Casluhim, which were also giants whom the Philistines lived amongst and migrated away from Crete to expropriate the Gaza region. And one of the reasons why they were, like the most powerful military state that Israel was up against from the time of the Judges right through to the time of King David, and when he brought them to heel. So, yeah. And there are other giants that are talked about in the Bible as well. There's also in that accounting the giant who has 6 fingers and 6 toes. and listed kind of as something distinct from the other giants. So there seems to be some nuances to the different kinds of the giants. So they all have some unique traits, could be just from a patronymic basis, or it could be from a different celestial mafia godfather. So we need to keep that in mind. And as you look at some of the wars that Israel goes through in the time of the conquest, they're going to go and take on King Sihon, who is a giant. And his ally is King Og, who is the last of the Rephaim, and is ruling at that time from Edrei and Ashtaroth. And Og controlled 60 cities, so 12 Pentapolis city-states, high-walled city fortresses with villages that were part of the military complex in between. Wow. And then Sihon had somewhere between 35 and 40 cities, so 7 to 8 as you count the number of cities in King Sihon's empire. And they were allied with the Midianites, who weren't giants. They may have intermarried and become hybrids, and there's a Pentapolis of 5 Midian kings that Moses and Joshua are going to deal with in the Eastern campaign before they go across the flood. So one presumes that there were a lot of other giants among them and hybrid giants. And we also get some kings that are listed, and in the book of the Psalms talks about these mighty kings along with Og and Sihon, and these are some of the kings that they're referring to. And you can look at in the book of Joshua with all the kings that he defeated during the time of the Exodus. One of the more famous ones is a fellow by the name of Jabim, or Jabim, as you would pronounce it in English, because it's Jabin, but in Hebrew it's a Y. And he was ruling Hazor, and Hazor was the center city from before times, from at least since the time of the flood, and it may have been renovated afterwards, that dominated the whole northern region and the Northern Alliance. And so that would be another one that I would identify. And also that there's a Jabin in the time of the judges that's taking on that same bloodline and Jabin king title. So just as Og or Ug is also thought to be a king. So we may not know his true name if Ug is actually translated as king. So he may have had several names. So, a couple other giant names that you might want to look at is Adoni Zedek and Adoni Bezek. That's in the in the various conquest wars of the giants that are named. So, yeah, a lot more giants as individuals that are named than what most people would give credit for. Let alone there are many more tribes of giants that people don't necessarily associate with giants, other than the standard Rephaim and Anakim and Horim and Hivim and Avim and Amalekim. There's a whole list of other ones that I go through in book 2 and show you how we identify them as giant tribes versus hybrids, and then take them back to a patriarch. And I also take the patriarch of the hybrids back. So you might look at the Amorites, who don't have a patriarch, 9 patriarchless Canaanite tribes. That's going to go back to probably a combination of the Baalim god that's listed in the Ugaritic text as Amor, and he was the god of Ugarit, and but part of the Baalim council at Mount Hermon. And that name could have been the root word for the giant as one of his offsprings, named the same. And in the Ugaritic text, you get Amur as a god and a servant of the gods, or a demigod. So you actually get that name Amur in the Ugaritic text for the patriarch, Rephaim patriarch, for the Amorites. And or you could take that maybe back to, if you look at the spelling for the word Amorite in Hebrew, it's number 587, Amor. And that's very similar and akin to Hamor a king of Shechem in the time of Jacob and Isaac. So there could be a connection, or that is a patronymic title from that Rephaim race that is where Amor for Amorite comes from. So, and throughout the book, I go through a lot. And I won't go through all the minutia of each one, but there's a lot of giants that I identify, and a lot of tribes of giants that I identify in book 2. And if people haven't seen the new book 2, I'll just sort of get it up here. It's been available on Amazon.com since March 12th. I got my books about 10 days later, and I've shipped all of the pre-orders, and still have lots of inventory and continuing to ship. Canada's not got inventory on Amazon.ca yet, neither does .uk or anywhere else, and they're seemingly looking after the US market first. But the Kindle version is up for it, and it's got, the new book has 35-star ratings already, and it just released. So book 1 has almost 650 ratings, maybe getting close to 1,700, and it's it's a 5-star rating. If you did the count or the math on it, it's probably over 1,500. It was rated very well, and this one is off to probably a faster start on the 5 stars. So I think when you do a sequel, you have to do things that the audience is looking for. Otherwise, they're going to say, well, I'm not sure why he wrote another book. So believe me, book 2 is designed for Christians, and it has material not covered in book 1, and really gives people an idea about prehistory giants, hybrid giants, and the angelic hierarchy, and then starts to link it into end time prophecy in the last sections. So I'm not sure where William has gotten to. So some of the kings that in some of the wars, I cover all the wars of the giants in the conquest. So I start in with Genesis 14. I do cover Genesis 14 in book 1, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down the names of the kings of both the Canaanites and the Mesopotamian kings, and link them back to giants. And there's a lot of meanings in their name there as well. For example, you have King Arioch out of the Mesopotamian alliance, and that means a lion-like. And he's from the region where Nergal ruled, which was a lion god, also listed as a god of the Avim in the Bible. And that seems to be likely part of the group of people that we see show up in David's Mighty Men, as the lion men of Moab and Gadites. And so Arioch means lion-like, and lion there goes back to the same series of words that Arioch does. So one of the things I did, go ahead.
Mr. Wayne, like there's different races here, here, with humans.
Yep.
Is there different races of giants as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think you have different fallen angels who produce different lines, and depending on what their nature is, I think depending on what those giants might look at. So typically I talk, in book 1 about the red-haired, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, hazel-eyed, pale-skinned ones that are part of, before the flood as the Tuatha De Danann, and part of the Aryans and the Scythians. And we see those show up after the flood as Horim being the red-haired ones, and the Anakim being the blonde-haired ones. Amorites probably are connected to a blonde-haired tribe because they're depicted as blonde hair as well. So Amor, or the patriarch, was part of that blonde-haired grouping. And so, but you also get like these lion men. So they would come from another watcher. And we do get a watcher that has 4 faces. And that's a cherubim. Has a face of a human, and a face of an eagle, and the face of an ox, probably more likely a bull, and the face of a lion. And probably uh, part of the warrior god aspect, because cherubim are looked at as protectors of Eden once Adam and Eve are separated from the tree of life in God's garden. And so they are depicted in occult and polytheist history as guarding things as well, like the thrones, like the palaces, like the temples and the gateways to the other world. So depending on which face they took, they would pass on that DNA when they took a physical form. So if they took the lion form, you would see lion men, lion Nephilim, lion Rephaim. And we get lots of reliefs in Sumeria and in Egypt and elsewhere that depict these mercenary lion warrior type of giants. And we also get like the Anunnaki, which I think are a depiction of the cherubim in Sumeria. So you have these famous reliefs where you see these Anunnaki standing around what seems to be a technological tree of life or some other sort of technology with things in their hands, and they're either doing a ritual or they're performing something with the technology. And they're depicted two different ways. They're depicted one with these eagle or bird faces, and then other times they're depicted the same way, just, the same wings, the same stocky legs and everything, and they'll have a dark-haired, bushy beard face. And so if they took a human form and took a human head form when they took their form, they would produce probably dark-haired giants. Well, do we see dark-haired giants in the Indo-Aryans and or in the giants? And we do, and the most famous one is Gilgamesh and Syrian kings, and the Aryans and the Persian kings that go take their bloodlines back to the Aryan patriarchs of giants. And so I think those are a different kind as well.
Yes.
So you also have, for example, with that cherubim again, and linking that in with not biblical accounts of these types of giants seen there, but in Southeast Asia, they have something called Tengu gods, and these are like watcher gods that also includes the dragon god. So it's a term for these watcher gods, and there's 4 groups of watchers, and included in there are these bird-faced gods who produce bird-faced warriors. And so they're called Tengu warriors, and you can Google Tengu, and typically you get most of them shown out of the Japanese side of it, but they're shown all the way through Southeast Asia. And it's the same thing as the Xibalba in the House of Camazotz in the Popol Vuh. Same type of bird type of faces, and we're all warriors. So I think there are different kinds. We just don't know how many different kinds. And in the Bible, we get many kinds of orders of angels. So, we're familiar with the watchers, but then you've got, angels, as you take their names back to the Greek, are Arche and Dunamis and Exousia and Icarus and others, and they fill out that order, but we don't get any descriptions as to what they would look like. I do provide the order, but there's an interesting Gnostic gospel that's called Pistis Sophia. And in it, it shows these watchers that have been punished and sent to the pit prison. And they have many different facial features to them. So you get the serpents, as in the seraphim, and you get the lions, and one's called Ariel, which again is very similar to the pretty much identical to the word for lion, Ari and Ariel. And lion-like, as you look that up in Hebrew. But you also get ones that have dog faces or jackal faces, like Anubis, for example, or Nebaz, the barking Avim god. And so that might be where the dogman mythos is based. And you got bear-faced ones and monkey-faced ones and all sorts of different faces. So if they produced then they would have produced other ones. Maybe there's, maybe they're a little bit different. But you could imagine, or you could postulate that maybe that's where Bigfoot or Yeti
Yeah,
comes from, right? Because they seem to
that's
be a
right.
Nephilim kind of creature. So
Yeah. Gary, we got a question from one of your fans out of Rumble, and they're asking, do they go to heaven when they die? Where do they go when the giants die?
the giants, yeah. So these become the evil spirits. These are um, when in Genesis 6:3, when God said, "I'm not going to permit an immortal spirit, which is the counterfeit spirit passed on to the giants, to dwell in the physical world inside a physical body forever and be a physical God, that he's going to limit life to 120 years, then at that point in time, there's a lifespan set on the physical dwelling place for the spirit, the soul, and the body of this world. So when that body dies as a giant and with a counterfeit spirit, then that spirit doesn't go back to heaven and go to sleep like humans do. And we're told that our spirits go to sleep hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times in the Bible. And the book of Ecclesiastics, we're told that our spirit goes back to heaven when we die. But it's in that sleep sort of state. But disembodied spirits, they're forced to roam the earth. Is one location they'll be. In their occult rituals, they try and get the knowledge to find their way to their heaven, which is where their fallen angels rule from, the celestial mafia godfathers, as I like to call them, and that'll be Hades or Sheol, the other world, Anwin, Argatha. There's 1,000 different names for the same location around the world. And so that's where they try to get through, and why they have a Gnostic knowledge to try and get to their heaven and wait for their gods to create a new world for them through the destruction of this world. And the other location you're going to find them is in the pit prison as well. So the worst of the ones, which are called the terrible ones, and the ones is the male plural, or a team, as you would take that out to its plural format. They show up in Ezekiel 32, Isaiah 25, and elsewhere, cover them off in detail in book 2 as well. And these are the ones who did terrible things to humankind and were slain, likely their heads chopped off. And I cover off beheading in book 2 as well. And they're sent to the sides of the pit into cells. And these terrible ones are talking to Pharaoh, another terrible one of the bloodlines, along with the mighty that are there as well. But doesn't go back to Gibor in that application. It goes back to El, as in a god or an angel. So those are the parent gods or the offspring gods who created giants both before and after the flood. Now, these terrible ones are called mighty ones, and that is Gibor and Giborim, describing giants in that application. So we see this phenomena of these disembodied spirits show up in the New Testament, with Jesus dealing with 3 descriptions of these entities that he's depossessing people or exorcising people to get that demon spirit out. And so they're called unclean spirits, evil spirits, and devils in the KJV translation. Now, that's a bad translation there for devils. They're used interchangeably, talking about the same being. And that word goes back to the Greek word daemon, which is the source word for demon, and means the same thing in English as it does in Greek. And where you would normally see diablos used as with the devil and Satan, this is a different word that's reflecting these lower, inferior types of demigods in their spirit form after they became disembodied. So now if we link back in the meaning for the word Rapha, which has 2 source words coming out. So the 2 words coming out of meaning healer, 7495 Rapha, is 7496 and 97, and 96 is the evil spirit, demon spirit, disembodied spirit, just as 7497 is the giant definition. And you have to look at what's being used, how it's being used in the text as it goes back to Hebrew to make those delineations. And the word for spirit or demon spirit, Rapha 7496, is also used in association with death as well in applications in the Bible. Again, all things I cover off in book 2. So yeah, they are the disembodied spirits, or the other Hebrew word describing these evil spirits is the word shed, and very much, or sedeh, very much the same word as words associated with the Tuatha De Danann.
Yes, sir. You know, Mr. Wayne, Goliath and his brothers, what do you think they had, blonde hair or red hair?
Well, it's you could make an argument for dark hair there too.
Okay.
Depending on where this Araph came from. But because you can also use, and a lot of theologians would say Rapha can be used for a patriarchal designation. So his father was a giant. That could mean generic giant. It could mean the father as the patriarch, and it can also mean a tribe of giants. So again, the application. So you could interpret these giants as being the son of a giant or son of Rapha. And again, that is so very familiar with Araph, or similar to Araph, that Josephus assigns to the name that you would think it's probably from the Raphaim. And just before I get back to the hair color, well, no, I'll go right to the hair color on it. I won't go down another rabbit hole. You have the Raphaim, who are not only long-necked, but also very much akin to the long-necked Anakim. And the Anakim were blonde. And so they're very closely associated, as are the Horim that are from the same region, which are red hair.
And right.
So it's hard to know what the hair color is going to be. You can make an argument for dark as being part of the Crete influence of the dark-haired Indo-Aryans. But typically, I would say that when you look at the details of Goliath, I would take them back to probably Anakim. And as Anakim, I would say he would be blonde hair.
Okay. You know, Mr. Wayne, how do I put this? The Nephilim, like Nimrod, became a Gibberim. Is that a mighty one, or that's something? It has nothing to do with mighty ones, and Gibberim is something totally different.
Well, Mighty One is the English translation for Gibberim. It's also mighty, brave, noble. It has a number of different English translations as it's used. So he's a mighty one, as in a Gibberim, but not necessarily a giant. So and so again, it's how it's used in the text. So typically, a giant has from a biblical perspective, it has a male father as a giant, or a male god. And so from that aspect, we know who the father is of Nimrod, and that's Cush. And he's son of Ham. So now in polytheism, they have accounts in Greek and Sumerian history where female gods procreated with human males to create a giant. So we don't know who Cush's wife is, but because there's a genealogy associated with Cush and descendants, but not with Nimrod, one presumes from that Cush did not marry a female goddess, or a goddess, double using the feminine aspect there. But so I think, if anything, is Nimrod would have intermarried with goddesses or female giants to create bloodlines thereafter, and for those reasons his genealogy stops biblically at Nimrod.
Okay. Would you say I'm sorry.
Now,
Go ahead.
just to sort of back things up, so, and you're not going to get giant patriarchs in the Table of Nations. They're just not there. So you don't see Rapha as the patriarch for the Rephaim tribe. And you don't see Arba as the patriarch for the Anakim tribe. You don't see Hori as the patriarch for the Horim tribe. You don't see those patriarchs in the Table of Nations. These are for the descendants of Noah.
Okay.
But you do get with the Canaanites who intermarried with, well, I think Canaan, as I make the case for in book 2, his daughters before the Babel dispersion and after taking the full blunt of the Ham curse, he's going to send his daughters to intermarry with the Baalim to produce the Rephaim giants. And then afterwards, Canaan will intermarry with female giants, as will Seth and Sidon, and they become hybrids through that process. But the Amorites, the Jebusites, the Arvadites, all of those 9 patriarchless Canaanite tribes, they have a specific Rephaim patriarch. So that married daughters from the Canaanites. And so they're listed as the families, but you're not getting the Rephaim patriarch. But you do need those tribes listed in there so you understand the history that Israel goes through. And you get something similar to this that happens in Genesis 36, which is like an add-on to the Table of Nations, where you get the Dukes of Edom and the Horim that are there, is going to produce a female giantess named Timnah, who's going to marry Amalek, marry Eliphaz to produce Amalek and the Amalek hybrids. And so we understand the history from what's going on in Seir, but it's not part of the Table of Nations because those are basically all lineages of giants thereafter that are listed. And so the Amalekites actually moved to the Petra area. Amalek does, and takes his whoever he married, and they live amongst the Amalekim giants. And so we know there's a difference between the Amalekim and the Amalekites because the Amalekim show up in Genesis 14 in the War of Giants. And a couple hundred years later, in many generations, you have Eliphaz, son of Esau, who's going to marry Timnah to create the Amalekite hybrids. So when Israel is coming out of Egypt and is attacked at Rephidim by the Amalekites, this is a hybrid nation supported by real giants.
Yes, sir. Gary, do you think the elite in today's time are trying to become Gibberim mighty ones like Nimrod did?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think Nimrod, two aspects of that. I think Nimrod was trying to utilize the knowledge, and maybe perhaps did, that gave him additional strength and things like that, that was presented to him to help build by Hermes, as the Masonic history goes, to build Babel City and Babel Tower, which also implies that Babel Tower probably had more power and technology to it than we generally give it credit for. And then the other way is he's going to intermarry into the giants and create those bloodlines. And that goes on today, where people who have, like, let's say, new money, could be Bill Gates, it could be Bezos, and they start to participate in organizations like the Bohemian Grove or Bilderbergers. They're doing that and doing everything they can for the actual descendants of the giants, of the royals, so that they can have their next generation, their children, intermarry into the bloodlines and have a higher position. So kind of both directions, but also I think they're trying to create new giants today too. So whether or not it's going to be done through fallen angels or it's going to be done through technology, DNA manipulation, combination, I think we're going to see giants show up somehow, some way in the end time as well.
Oh, yes, sir. Because You know, they got their hands on Nimrod or Gilgamesh. One of these, somebody that was a mighty one or whatever yet, but they got their hands on them and cloned them, and they could be nurturing them for the next Antichrist.
Well, that's what a lot of people. I think what you might be referring to is the sarcophagus of Gilgamesh that is said to have been
Yes.
found, and so they were interested in that, in the technology and if any DNA. So the technology line is that in some lines of thought, the sarcophagus for these giants was what made them have the ability or provided the ability to heal themselves. They were very, very hard to kill. You had to behead them to kill them. So it was either something within the DNA that they had as gifts from the Celestial Mafia Godfathers, or it was this technology. And then obviously they were hoping to find some DNA so that they could, like in that what's the name of the movie where they recreate the dinosaurs from DNA, that sort of ideology, right?
Jurassic Park.
Yeah. So I think we need to be aware that they're always looking to do something like that because they want it to be like Atlantis. They want it to be like the golden age when the Watchers and giants walked amongst us. That's what they look at was the ideal world, and that's what.
Yeah, they love the copycat.
Yeah, they do. And I actually have a link. If people get a hold of me on that, I have, and you can follow it. There was a release after the Obama government, and it recorded an application by Hillary Clinton for information on this sarcophagus that was found in Syria.
Wow.
So if people want to get a hold of me, I'll send you to that, and you can click on the link. And there's not a whole bunch there, but it was definitely came from Clinton, and it's definitely talking about technology and DNA in there.
Well, and also they I've seen on YouTube, and I'm sure others have seen this, where they thought they found a body or found a giant in the Iraq War.
Yeah, that's really the same thing.
That's the same thing. Okay.
Yep.
Well, Mr. Wayne, if the Giants was to come back, and what size would they be? Would they be giants, or would they look like us?
Well, if they're recreated, they would be of a fairly large size.
Yeah.
And so when we look at dimensions we get out of the Bible, Og was the last of the Rephaim.
Okay.
As he's recorded as the remnant of the giants, Rapha. So last of the original generation that was created, I think, after the flood.
And he had a 13-foot bed.
A little bit bigger than that, actually. So it's recorded biblically as 4 cubits wide and 9 cubits long. So roughly 2-to-1 height to width ratio because they were stout and stocky and wide. And it was made of iron because wood would not hold its weight. And it was left on display at Rabbah for future generations of Israel to know that they just didn't fight people that were a little bit taller and wider than them, but to give them a bit of a visual, as were the bones put on display right up to the time of Josephus.
Wow.
Yeah. And so when you translate that and understand Og was a king, so he was king of Edrei and Ashtaroth and probably Ugarit before he moved back to Mount Hermon after the giant wars of Genesis 14, where most of the Rephaim tribe was wiped out. There were other tribes, but the Rephaim specifically that were located at Mount Hermon.
And do we know? Sorry.
Hang on. So when you look at a royal cubit, that's 21 inches versus the standard 18. So that's going to make the bed 7 feet wide. So he's going to be 4, 5, or 6 feet wide.
Yep.
And that's going to make the bed almost 16 feet long.
Whoa.
Okay, so now he's going to be minimum 12 feet, probably more like 14 feet, maybe 14 and a half to 15 feet, and he's going to be 4 to 6 feet wide.
Whoa.
Yeah, and so 400 years later, Goliath, who seems to be part of that bloodline of Rapha, because his father was Rapha, um, was 6 cubits in a span. And as king of Gath, he would have been 11 feet 3 inches tall.
Okay.
And he would have been, wide as well. So he probably on that dimension would have been at least 5 feet wide.
And these are not clumsy guys. These guys were agile. They could
Yep.
move. They're not. It wasn't like they make giants out to be stupid and slow.
No, they were muscular and they were quick, fast. They had their hand speed was godlike. They were ambidextrous. They were nimble. And so they were the ultimate warrior. They weren't some sideshow freak.
No.
And they were looked upon as beautiful with their hair and stuff like that. The word fair roots back to their skin color and their fair colored hair.
Yeah. And like King David says he had ruddy red hair.
Yep.
And fair skin.
Yep.
Was there any other giant slayers other than David?
Oh yeah. David had his mighty men.
Yeah.
Right? That's all they did was they hunted down Philistines and giants.
Yeah, he has lots of them, huh?
Yeah, lots of them. There's accounts of a few that killed specific giants and brothers of Goliath recorded in the Bible as well. So,
Gary, and this is an off-the-wall question, but she's been commenting in the comment box, and she wants to know: do our pets go to heaven with us?
And we don't know. We don't know. We're not told that. We know they have a different spirit. So biblically, ruach or pneuma in the Greek, it's understood that there's a spirit that's for the angelic realm. There's a spirit that's for humans. There's the counterfeit spirit that is the Xeroxing of the angelic spirit. And you have spirits for animals. And they're all distinct. So our spirits sleep. That spirit would come from heaven, so one would presume those spirits sleep and go back to heaven, but they probably go back to a different source. And so if people say, they kind of ask that question because they say, well, we see our pets in heaven. It's a possibility based on that, but not necessarily. So I'm not sure how the spirit thing works with the animals, but we know they have a spirit that allows them to continue to live. So when you see, DNA and cloning things going on these days, and the animals don't live, that's because they're only able to create the soul and the body. They can't create that spirit that comes from heaven.
And that's what demons or disembodied spirits are lacking.
They're missing the soul and the body. So they could go into a cloned being and interact with the world, because that would be, the dwelling place for the spirit, as Oikotarian is the word used for that.
That's how they would avatar.
No, that's a different process than this. Okay. So demon possession, as we understand it, would invade the human host. So you have two spirits in the Oikotarian, the soul and the body. And that's why there's a bit of a war. Now, some of the occult will invite these demons in, and they're said to get additional power. And in that tradition, they have the ability through rituals and words to control the demon, perhaps not. But that's for them to live with whatever they do. But that's not the avatar-avatara effect. The avatar-avatara begins with the fallen angel. And the fallen angel has more of a symbiotic relationship when they do this process. And so in the Hindu tradition, you have the god Vishnu, who's going to be an avatar for an avatara, I think 16 times or even more. One of them is Buddha. And so he provided wisdom and knowledge for Buddha. And so Buddha would be the avatar. Okay, and then there would still be two spirits dwelling in there, but it's to add power, and it's more symbiotic, and it's not, you don't have this demon spirit wanting to take control. So we get that biblically with Satan entering into Judas to have the courage to go through with betraying Jesus, and so we know this can happen biblically. So one should be aware with what Antichrist will receive as additional power, probably from the demons and also probably from a fallen angel. And it may include Azazel, it may not. But certainly Antichrist is associated with the one who comes up out of the abyss, and bad Napoleon, who I think is Azazel.
You talk a lot about Azazel in your new book.
I do talk about him in the new book. Yep. I do, in different ways than I do in book one, from a biblical perspective more, let's put it that way. And in the Bible, we're told in 2 Thessalonians and in Revelation 13 that the beast or Antichrist is going to receive his power from Satan or the dragon. So you have two different applications. One's the dragon, one's Satan, but they're both talking about this, I think, the dragon, Satan, as he's described in Revelation 12. So one deduces that Antichrist will have this additional power of Satan within him, or possibly it's Azazel, but I think it's Satan.
Yes. Gary, we got another question from John Bear, and he's wondering, do you think the Tower of Babel is in Turkey?
No, I do not. I think it was in Shinar, which is the transliteration of Sumer into English from Hebrew. And when you take the definition of Shinar back, it's back in Mesopotamia. Accounts that come out of Mesopotamia with Eridu would have been the location of the Tower of Babel there. And they have a tradition in a couple of epics with a fellow named Enmerakar that I talk about and link his name back to Nimrod. Both were third generation, both built the tower and had a dispersion with the confusion of languages. So I think that's the polytheist version of Nimrod.
Okay. Mr. Wayne, do you think there's good giants? Was there good giants that helped David, or no, not really, no?
Well, he does have two or three questionable
like the lion men, a Mogag.
Yeah,
they helped David, didn't they?
Yes, the Gadites, yeah. The lion-like Gadites. And you have Uriah the Hittite. So he would have been a hybrid human giant versus a full-blooded giant. And you also have this Makathim fellow from Makkah. And in book 2, I show you how we know Makkah, the Makathim is another giant race. And so he would have been.
All right. David, I'm sorry. Mr. Wayne, do you think Alexander the Great, do you think he became a giant or a mighty one through his all that stuff, rituals he did?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I mean, he was a bloodline royale to begin with. Yeah. But in book 1, I actually described the mythos of his birth that grows up around him. So in that, the god Amun takes a serpentine shape and has sex with Alexander's mother to produce Alexander. That's the mythos. But either way, he has still bloodlines that come from giants and fallen angels. So just all depends on how you want to get there. I was also thinking, when we're asking about other names of giants that are named, the three most famous ones, um, outside of sort of Goliath, Og, and Sihon, would be the three that lived in Kiriath Arba, or Hebron, as we would know that area today. And those were the ones cited by the scouts sent into the land of the covenant. And they're there even at the time of the Exodus, at the time of the conquest of the covenant land, and then into the time of the judges when they're finally slain by the tribe of Judah. And that is Talmai, Sheshai, and Ahiman. Now, what's really interesting, as that sort of connects back to the Makkah and the Makkah theme, is that there's another tribe of giants, and believe me, there's a lot of giant tribes I cover in book 2, in the land of Gesher, and these are the Gesherim, and they have 2 locations, but this is the one by Mount Hermon. And he has this place is run by a king Talmai, so he has this patronymic name of a giant because he's a giant as well. So there's some titles that sort of go down through history, either depicting a bloodline or just a specific kingship title. And when David is having wars in his giant wars, he makes a peace treaty with the king of Gesher, and sends him his daughter, Makkah, and Makkah is also a matriarchal name. So Absalom becomes a hybrid and described as beautiful and fair and everything else, and a great warrior. And he's the one who is going to try and overthrow David. So it starts to provide more insight as to some of the different peoples that are in the Bible.
Yes. Old Goliath and David, everybody knows that story, but there's so many other stories in the Old Testament, and Gary Wayne breaks it down in his Genesis 6 conspiracy for us. And your book, how many chapters are devoted to giants?
Oh, gee. Well,
Huh?
there's a lot. So the first, because I'm also talking about angels and fallen angels a lot in the first half. So the first section 1 is basically mostly about giants, and then I get into the angelic hierarchy, and then section 3, I'm talking about all the hybrid nations that come out. So they're technically a smaller form of giant. And then section 4, I'm going to name all of the giant nations and take them back to a patriarch. So that's a full section on that. And that, just with the pureblood giants, and that's chapters 31 through 41. So 10 chapters on that. And in some of them, they have multiple giant names grouped together, like the Gesherim, the Gerzim, and the Makkathim. I grouped those together. And the Philistines, I even show giant nations in there with the Cherathim, Caphtorim, and Casluhim. And David had Cherathim and Pelathim, which is another one, that were mercenaries that were protecting him. So he had giants around him as well that were, at least through money, protecting him. And then I go through section 5, and that starts at chapter 43 through 57. And this is the giant wars section. So we're dealing about Israel dealing with wars throughout the monarchy to the time of King Solomon. That's talking about these wars with these giants. So then section 6 and 7 end up, transition into end time prophecy. So sections 1 through 5 is all about prehistory, but there's a lot in there as well, with the fallen angelic realm and the Baalim and connections that people need to understand. And I would say, chapter for sure, sections 1 and 2 are absolutely essential reading to try and start understanding the Old Testament.
That's what I was trying to say a minute ago. Gary Wayne breaks it down in a way. And also, they're in the small chapters. It's not,
Yep.
it ain't like own and own, you can't digest it. You can digest it because the book is broken down into small chapters. Is that correct, Gary?
That's absolutely correct. And I do it that way because you're getting a lot of information.
Yes, you
Um,
bust a brain cell.
yeah, we don't want you to have some of your brain cells explode when you're trying to read too much or too fast. So do it as you can. And and the chapter titles are sort of designed for you to be able to go back as you get into the giant wars or into prophecy to go back and review these names, terms, and understandings and concepts that are talked about in earlier chapters. Because to understand what's going on in the Old Testament, you have to understand who the angels are, and you have to understand the giants, but in an expanded way, and how those terms and the things they did are interconnected with what's going to happen in the end time. And so if we understand that, you know, what we're dealing with is a war against not only flesh and blood, but those fallen angels that are in high places. And we fight against not just the ones we can see, the visible ones, but also the invisible ones.
Yeah.
So, and I'm going to cover off the assembly of the gods in a way that nobody's ever done it before.
Amen.
They have pieces of it, but what I provide you here is something that's not been done before. And this whole book is mostly about what's not been done before. It is as unique as book one, but in a different way. So I would say book two is Genesis 6 conspiracy on steroids for Christians and Dr. Heiser on steroids.
Yes. May Yahweh rest his soul. I haven't been in the comment box. And I want to apologize to Nicholas Johnson, Surfer Girl, Mama Bear, Johnny Bear, and all y'all that's been in the comment box. I'm sorry I haven't been commenting and trying to stimulate the comment box. I apologize. But I do know you're there, Nicholas, Surfer Girl, John Bear, and I just want to thank you guys.
Okay. Any other questions out of the chat?
No. I just want to know where. I've been running a link on the bottom of the screen, and I'm stating that they can get your book at Genesis 6 Conspiracy at gmail.com. Is that correct?
Yes. So, yep, you just go to www.genesis6conspiracy.com for the website, and you can email me through contact the author, and that is the Genesis6conspiracy at gmail.com email address. Again, the number 6. So if you want some information on some of the things that we might have been talking about, if I've got a document on that, I will send it to you. Or if you want to purchase a book, you can purchase book 1 or book 2. I also have a generous excerpt of all 84 chapters of book 2 and all 98 chapters of book 1. And if you wanted to get a Kindle version, or you can get a signed copy from me, you can also link over to Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, and BarnesandNoble.com to get a printed copy there. And if you wanted to get the digital version, you can link over to Kindle from the buy page as well. And I'm hoping in 2 months, because we signed off on everything and they're committed to the project, is I will have an audio book available for book 1 and links from the website, and I'll have links on my home pages on my media. So people who have been waiting for a audio version of the Genesis 6 conspiracy, that is coming. And 2 months after that or so, we'll have, so 2 months from now, hopefully Genesis 6 conspiracy part 1 audio. 2 months or so after that will be book 2 on audio, and it'll be available through Amazon.
Amen, Brother Gary. Amen. All right, my friends, we're rounded out to an hour. We're up on the hour right now. And I'd just like to close this program in a right way and pray. So please, my friends, bow your heads with me and let's pray to the Most High. Father Yahweh, we, Father, offer ourselves to you. To build with us and to do with us is thy will. Relieve us of the bondage of self, that do thy will and not my own will. and take away our difficulties, that our victories may bear witness over the people we will help today of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. Father, you said to knock, and we've been knocking all night long for the truth. You revealed the truth through Gary Wayne and others, and we want to thank you. We ask you to put a blanket of protection around Gary and his family. Father, you are the beginning and you are the end. Please allow us to see this in our walk. Amen, brothers and sisters. Amen. All right, Mr. Wayne, audience, much love. I love y'all from the bottom of my heart. Please come join us on Rumble. This is where Gary and I, all of his videos are going to be at Rumble. All right, so please come join us on Rumble. All right, Mr. Wayne, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All righty.